Let's talk Tanya for the 25th of Shevat of a leap year. Today we start chapter 25. A while ago, when we started chapter 18, so I mentioned that with this we are starting a unit of 8 chapters, chapter 18 through 25, all of which, there are a lot of ideas discussed therein, but it's one central idea. And now that we started chapter 25, all of the ideas that we've been learning, that we learned in the last 7 chapters, are all going to come together. In order to understand where we're going with this, let's back up a little and summarize where we were before this. So, Tanya is about Kikarev Elecha Hadavar Miyoid Beficha V'Vavcha L'Asaisei, which means that Moshe comes to the Jewish people and says, this Torah that I'm giving you, it's practical. You can do it. It's accessible. Every one of you can do it all the time. And the obvious question is, all of us, we have our struggles, our internal struggles. We have a Yetzer Hara, an evil inclination, or an animal soul that tries to stop us and deter us from doing what God wants of us to do. So what are the strategies that we have in order to defeat the animal soul in this battle, which is an ongoing battle? So Tanya gives us 2 general strategies. The first strategy, which we learned in chapters 16 and 17, what we called the long way, was the idea of meditating upon the greatness of God to the point of developing, generating, actually creating feelings for God. That was the first strategy which we discussed at length back then. And then, in the beginning of chapter 18, the Alter Rebbe focuses and he zooms in on the word mo'ed, the very. Moshe Rabbeinu says that the Torah that I'm giving you is karev elecha me'oid. It is very close and very practical. And to say that the idea that I can meditate and create feelings, that makes it very close and practical, the Alter Rebbe wasn't buying that. There has to be an easier way, and that's what these chapters are all about, is the easier way. And what is the easier way? That is by tapping into and leveraging our hidden love that we have for God, which is easier because we don't have to create this love. It exists. So the first thing we did was we analyzed what is this hidden love, and we explained that every single Jew naturally has this desire to connect to God. It's a super rational love, and it is so powerful to the point that Jewish people, we are all willing to give up our lives rather than to reject our relationship with God. And that's why when Jewish people are put up to the test of either converting out of the religion or having to give up their lives, they give up their lives because of this hidden love that we have for God. It's called hidden because it's hidden up until that point when a person is tested, when their faith is tested. But that doesn't help us. That doesn't help us in our everyday life because, again, that love is hidden and only comes to life when what we call a nesoyin of avodah zarah, a test of idolatry, arises. So the last few chapters, what we did was we explained that ultimately every mitzvah is an expression of God's unity, and every sin is an expression of idolatry, which therefore means that theoretically, we should be giving up our lives for every single sin. Now, God says that we shouldn't, but in terms of what are we doing when we sin, that understanding that there's this arbitrary line which we created as we spoke in yesterday's Tanya, and we say, well, idolatry isn't fine, but all other sins are fine, that's ridiculous, that's insanity. And if we were to stop and think about it for a second, we'd realize that ultimately every single time we are tempted to sin, this is a life and death situation, a spiritual life and death situation. Are we going to maintain our connection to God, or are we not going to maintain our connection to God? And if we're able to view every single sin in that way, then we can leverage and use this hidden love that we have for God in our everyday life in order to battle and combat our animal soul whenever it tells us to do any sin. But the Alter Rebbe, before we accept this, there's a little problem, which is that although every sin is tantamount to idolatry, as we explained in yesterday's Tanya, idolatry is still unique in terms of its after effects. Every sin, at the moment of the sin, we are utterly disconnected from God, just as if we were bowing down to our cross, God forbid. But afterwards, if it's an ordinary sin, a regular sin, so we recover from that, and our relationship with God recovers from that. There are very severe sins, such as idolatry, and some others also, in which the relationship never really recovers. So how can we compare and say that every single sin is like idolatry? Maybe I could say, no, I'm willing to give up my life for a sin which is going to cut off my relationship with God for now and forever. But a regular sin, okay, I'm willing at that moment while I'm doing the sin to be cut off from God, because afterwards my relationship will be restored. So there seems to be a flaw in the logic over here. And that flaw, or that apparent flaw, the Alter Rebbe will address in tomorrow's Tanya.